The wind screamed like a living creature, tearing across the jagged cliffs and sending sharp shards of rock spinning like deadly needles through the crimson sky. Zyra pressed herself into the narrow opening of the shelter, her chest heaving as she tried to keep calm. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to escape. But the storm outside was merciless. Even the air felt alive, heavy with electricity and the scent of ozone. She had survived storms before, but this one was unlike anything she had ever known. The shelter was small and cramped, carved into the rocky hill decades ago, long before Zyra had been born. Its walls were cold and rough under her hands, and the darkness seemed to close in around her like a cage. She could hear the wind howling outside, how it tore at the metal remnants of old structures scattered across the planet's surface. Each crash of debris against stone made her flinch, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale as she had been taught. Panic would only waste her energy, and energy was precious here. She crouched lower, wrapping her long fingers around the small pack she had carried for days. Inside were a few rations, barely enough to last her until the storm passed. She had scavenged these from abandoned outposts, risking her life each time she stepped out into the open. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she ignored it. Hunger was easier to endure than being caught by the predators. Zyra's society was ruthless. She had learned early on that survival meant strength, cunning, and sometimes cruelty. Her people had taught her that showing fear was a weakness. Yet here, alone in the shelter, she felt fear like a living thing crawling under her skin. The predator that hunted her was somewhere outside. She did not know exactly where, but the thought of it made her muscles tighten. Every sound, each snap of a rock, each gust of wind, felt like a threat. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small device. It was old, scratched, and almost useless, but it could detect movement nearby. She turned it on, and the tiny red light blinked once, twice, then steadied. No motion. Her heart eased slightly, but only slightly. The storm itself could conceal a predator, or it could be a signal that danger had already passed over the surface. She could not be sure. Hours passed. Zyra did not move, afraid to make a sound. She closed her eyes, listening to the storm and to her own heartbeat. She thought about the world she had come from, a place where survival was constant, where every day was a battle against stronger, faster, and smarter beings. She had learned to fight, to run, to hide. Every lesson, every scar had led her here. And yet, despite all her training, she felt a cold dread that she could not shake. The shelter was dark, but Zyra had learned to use darkness to her advantage. Her eyes, adapted to low light, could make out the shapes of the walls and the small alcoves. She moved carefully, checking her surroundings. There was a small pool of water in a corner, collected from a broken pipe. She drank sparingly, tasting the metallic tang that was familiar and comforting. It reminded her that she was alive, that she had survived this long. She thought about leaving, about risking the storm to find a safer place. But the thought of stepping outside made her chest tighten. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the cliffs in jagged bursts of white. Each flash revealed the twisted shapes of the landscape, the shattered remains of buildings, and the scars the storm had left on the land. Zyra shivered and pressed herself deeper into the shelter, wishing for warmth that was not coming. Time passed slowly. The storm showed no sign of weakening. Zyra's mind wandered, thinking of what had brought her here. She had been fleeing a predator, a creature designed to hunt the intelligent and the weak alike. Her people had long known of its existence, and the few who survived encounters told stories in hushed tones. She had almost been caught once, her agility barely saving her. She remembered the sharp claws, the gleaming eyes, the hunger in its movements, and she remembered the fear that had frozen her in place for a heartbeat too long. She had learned from that mistake. Fear could not control her. Fear could only teach her to be more careful, more cunning. She had survived by staying hidden, by moving silently, and by trusting her instincts. And now, trapped in this shelter, she relied on the same lessons. Zyra's mind drifted to the people she had left behind. She had no family, only distant allies who valued her for her skill and her ability to survive. Trust was rare among her kind. Betrayal was common. Every connection was fragile. She had learned to rely only on herself, and that had kept her alive this long. Yet, in the quiet of the storm, she felt a pang of loneliness. Survival was necessary, but it came with a cost. A sudden sound snapped her from her thoughts. It was faint, almost lost in the roar of the storm, but it was there. A footstep, or something moving carefully across the rocky surface. Zyra froze, every muscle tensing. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. Her device registered movement. Something, or someone, was out there. Her first instinct was to run, to hide even deeper. But she could not leave the shelter. The storm outside was too violent. She had no choice but to wait, to see who, or what, was coming. She gripped a small weapon, a slender blade that was more for defense than attack. Her people had taught her that sometimes survival meant holding nothing back, but the storm made any fight impossible. She had to rely on her mind. Minutes felt like hours. The sound grew closer, more deliberate. Whoever it was moved with care, not the careless stamp of a predator. Zyra's heart beat faster, confusion mixing with relief and caution. This was different. This was not her kind, and it was not a predator. She tightened her grip on her blade, ready for anything. The shadow appeared in the doorway, framed by the flashing light of the storm. Zyra could see the outline of a figure, upright, 2 legs, 2 arms, head on top of the body. It moved slowly, cautiously, as if it knew of the danger but was not afraid. Zyra froze. She had never seen a creature like this before. Its shape was familiar in its symmetry, but nothing like the predators or her own kind. She recognized it immediately as intelligent. That recognition sent a jolt through her. The figure paused, then moved forward slightly, stepping into the shelter. Zyra's breath caught. It carried no visible weapon, no claws, no threatening posture. Yet its presence alone was a mystery, a challenge to everything she had known. She could not predict what it might do. The stories of humans were rare in her world, strange beings from distant stars, curious, clever, and sometimes unpredictable. She had been taught to fear the unknown, but the unknown was here, standing in front of her. Her mind raced. Should she attack? Should she run? Should she make herself smaller, invisible? The creature did not advance aggressively. It seemed cautious, careful, thoughtful. It placed a small object on the ground, something metallic, blinking faintly. Zyra narrowed her eyes, studying the gesture. Communication? A trap? She could not tell. The storm's fury made the air thick and heavy. Zyra's chest rose and fell rapidly. She had survived so much, relied on her skills and instincts, and yet this single human presence filled her with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She had no idea what it wanted, or if it could be trusted. Trust was dangerous, but so was isolation. Time stretched, each second heavy with tension. Zyra watched the human silently, studying its posture, its movements, the way it breathed. There was no aggression, no predatory instinct, and yet there was intelligence, awareness, and something she could not name, a quiet confidence. It did not seem like her kind, nor like a predator. It seemed alive in a different way. She thought of the storm, of the predators, of the countless dangers she had faced, and she realized, with a shiver that was not entirely fear, that she might not be able to survive without understanding this human. The storm would not end, the predators would not rest, and the shelter, small and fragile as it was, might be the only chance they both had. Zyra's muscles relaxed slightly, though her mind remained sharp. She would watch, she would learn, and she would wait. Perhaps, just perhaps, this strange creature could be something more than a threat. Perhaps it could be a key to surviving the storm and the dangers that lay beyond it. The human moved again, carefully, as if aware of her gaze. It left another small item on the floor, a container, simple, unassuming. Zyra's instinct screamed caution, but she could not help her curiosity. Slowly, she stepped from her hiding place, keeping herself low, every sense alert. She approached the object, her fingers brushing it lightly. Inside was water, clean and safe. A simple act, but it carried meaning. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the shelter, a fragile connection had begun. Zyra realized that survival might not be about strength alone, or speed, or cunning. Perhaps it was about understanding, about trust, and about recognizing intelligence, even when it came in a form she had never seen before. Hours passed, the storm unrelenting. Yet Zyra stayed alert, ready, and cautious. She did not know what the human wanted, or if it could be trusted. But, for the first time, she considered the possibility that she might not have to face the storm alone. And that thought, small as it was, gave her a flicker of hope in the darkness. The wind screamed outside, tearing at the shelter and the cliffs beyond. Inside, Zyra and the human faced the unknown, silent and tense. Each waited, watched, and wondered what the other would do. The storm would not wait for them. Survival demanded decisions, courage, and awareness. And for the first time in a long while, Zyra felt that perhaps she was not entirely alone. She crouched near the blinking device the human had left, studying it, learning from it. Every instinct, every lesson, every scar mattered now. She had survived storms before, predators before, fear before, but this, the unknown, intelligent, untested human, was something new, something she had to understand if she wanted to survive. And so, Zyra waited. She waited and watched, every sense alert, every thought focused. The storm would not last forever, but the choices she made here, in the dark, in the shelter, might decide whether she lived or died. And when she finally dared to look at the human, she felt the first flicker of what could be trust. It was fragile, it was uncertain. It was the first step toward something that could change everything. The storm raged for hours, relentless and furious, but inside the shelter the world was quiet, except for Zyra's own breathing. She remained crouched near the small metallic device the human had left. It blinked softly, like a tiny heartbeat in the darkness, and she studied it carefully. She had learned to be cautious, but curiosity gnawed at her. What kind of being was this human? And why had it left food and water instead of attacking her as a predator would have? Every sound outside made her tense. The wind whipped against the walls and rocks tumbled down the cliffs. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the shelter for brief, blinding moments. Each flash revealed her own reflection in the small puddles on the floor, pale blue skin almost glowing in the fractured light. Her breathing was slow and careful, but inside her mind the thoughts raced faster than ever. She glanced toward the doorway. The human had not moved. The figure was still, even in the flashing light of the storm. Zyra's instincts screamed at her to stay hidden, but another part of her, the part that had survived every challenge thrown at her since birth, urged her to understand this being. She had survived predators, hunger, cold, and fear. Surely she could survive this encounter by observing and learning. Slowly, Zyra inched closer to the human. Every step was calculated, deliberate. She had to know what it wanted, whether it was a threat or something else entirely. Her fingers brushed the ground lightly, making no sound. The human shifted slightly, not in alarm, but almost as if it had sensed her presence. Zyra froze, her pulse racing. The being's movements were careful, precise, and calm. There was no sign of hostility, only awareness. She crouched behind a low wall, watching the human place another small item on the ground. This time, it was a device that emitted a soft, warm light. Zyra's eyes widened. It was unfamiliar, but she recognized its purpose immediately. Illumination. Humans had an uncanny ability to make tools that served precise needs. She had scavenged many things during her journeys, but the simplicity and effectiveness of this light made her pause. The human thought ahead, even here in a storm. Her stomach growled. Hunger was a constant companion, and though she had rationed her supplies carefully, she had used some already. The human had left a small pack of rations as well. She studied it, hesitant. Could she trust this being enough to eat what it had left? She could see no trap, no hidden threat. Slowly, she reached forward and picked up the pack, examining it. The food smelled strange, but not dangerous. Hunger won over caution, and she took a small bite. The taste was bland, but nourishing. She chewed carefully, her senses alert to any sudden movement. Minutes passed. Zyra felt a strange combination of relief and caution. She was not alone, yet the human had not moved aggressively. Instead, it seemed to be waiting, observing, in its own way. She realized something that both frightened and intrigued her. Humans did not strike immediately. They studied, thought, and acted with patience. She had encountered predators who were faster, stronger, and more violent. But humans were clever, and that cleverness was a different kind of danger. The human spoke suddenly, though Zyra could not understand the sounds. The voice was soft, calm, almost soothing, and it carried a rhythm that her ears could recognize. She tilted her head, listening, trying to discern meaning. Its tone was not threatening. The words were foreign. But the intent was clear. It was communicating. Zyra had learned many forms of language in her life, but this was new. She had to rely on observation, on gestures, on mimicry. She raised a hand cautiously, unsure if the gesture would provoke aggression or understanding. The human's eyes, bright and steady, met hers. Slowly it raised its own hand, mirroring her movement. Zyra felt a flicker of cautious hope. Perhaps communication was possible. Perhaps this being was not a predator in the traditional sense, but something else entirely. Hours passed as they sat in tense silence, each observing the other. Zyra learned quickly to interpret small movements, the way the human tilted its head, the way it held its body, the way its eyes shifted. There was intelligence there, awareness, and an unusual calm under pressure. Zyra had never seen a creature handle danger with such quiet patience. She felt a mixture of fear and admiration. As the storm raged on, Zyra decided to test the human's intent. She picked up a small, sharp rock from the ground and placed it in front of herself. The human watched carefully, not moving too close. Then Zyra tapped the rock lightly against the floor, producing a small sound. The human responded by tapping a different object in its pack, creating a soft echo. Zyra's heart raced. This was not a fight. This was recognition, a form of understanding. She had begun to comprehend the human's method of communication: observation, patience, response. She took a deep breath, calming herself. The storm outside was fierce, but inside the shelter, something new was forming. A fragile connection between two beings from different worlds. Zyra realized that survival was no longer just about hiding or fighting. It was also about understanding, adapting, and observing. She had survived countless threats, but this was a challenge of a different kind. The human moved again, carefully placing another device on the ground. This one emitted a faint hum and small vibrations. Zyra approached cautiously, studying it. She realized it was a sensor of some kind, detecting movement in the shelter. She could see its purpose clearly, to avoid surprises, to anticipate threats. Humans had a way of turning intelligence into survival tools, and Zyra was witnessing it firsthand. She felt a strange mix of fear and admiration. This being, so physically fragile compared to her predators, had survived and thrived using tools, thought, and observation. It was unlike anything she had encountered before. She began to see that survival was not always about strength or speed, but about cleverness, patience, and ingenuity. Humans had mastered these qualities in a way that few species could match. Zyra decided to take another risk. She stepped closer to the human, speaking softly in her own language, though she doubted the human could understand. The human tilted its head, listening carefully. Zyra repeated the words, slower this time, adding gestures to aid comprehension. The human responded with simple gestures of its own, pointing to objects, demonstrating their use. Slowly, painfully, they began to establish a rudimentary understanding. The storm outside continued, but inside the shelter the two beings were no longer simply surviving. They were learning, adapting, and communicating. Zyra felt a sense of relief mixed with caution. She still did not know whether the human could be trusted fully, but she had no other choice. The storm was too powerful, and the shelter offered the only safety. She had to rely on this being, at least temporarily. Time passed, and the storm began to lessen slightly. The wind's roar dimmed, though the sky remained a violent swirl of crimson clouds. Zyra and the human moved cautiously around the shelter, testing each other's reactions, sharing resources, and learning the rhythms of their combined survival. Zyra felt a growing sense of respect for the human. It was patient, careful, and intelligent in ways she had not expected. It thought ahead, planned, and adapted to the storm, with a quiet confidence that was almost foreign to her own instincts. As night fell, the storm outside continued in bursts, but inside, a fragile calm emerged. Zyra shared water and small rations with the human, and in turn, the human demonstrated simple ways to make their shelter more secure. They moved as a team, silently but effectively, learning each other's strengths. Zyra realized that for the first time in a long time, she was not alone. She thought about her life before this storm, the constant fear, the endless running, the predators, the harsh lessons. She had survived because she relied on herself, because she trusted only her instincts. But now, she saw another way to survive, another method that did not rely solely on strength or cunning, but on cooperation, observation, and trust. The human was unlike any predator she had faced. It did not hunt with claws or teeth. It did not rely on speed or aggression. Instead, it used intelligence, patience, and careful planning. Zyra marveled at this. She had underestimated humans before, but now, in the shelter, watching it work, she understood that survival came in many forms. Hours passed into night, and the storm began to fade, leaving the shelter battered but intact. Zyra and the human rested near each other, alert but calm. They had established a tentative rhythm, a fragile bond of understanding. Zyra realized that this partnership, however temporary, might be the key to surviving not only the storm, but the dangers that lay beyond it. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the human breathe, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time, she felt that survival might not always be solitary. Perhaps with intelligence, patience, and careful observation, she could navigate the dangers ahead with a partner who thought differently, but no less effectively. The storm had brought fear, danger, and uncertainty, but it had also brought an unexpected chance for connection, understanding, and shared survival. Zyra understood now that intelligence, patience, and trust qualities she had never fully appreciated in others could be as powerful as any weapon or instinct. The night passed slowly, but the shelter became a small haven, a place of observation, learning, and adaptation. Zyra watched the human, and for the first time she wondered if she might survive not just because of her own abilities, but because of the unique qualities this creature possessed. It was a strange, foreign being, but its intelligence, patience, and careful observation offered a glimmer of hope in a world ruled by storms and predators. As the first hints of dawn colored the sky, Zyra made a silent promise to herself. She would survive this storm not alone, but with this human. She would learn from it, understand it, and perhaps in doing so, discover new ways to survive that she had never imagined. The shelter, once a place of hiding and fear, had become a place of cautious trust, fragile understanding, and the first step toward a partnership that might change everything. And so Zyra waited, alert and cautious, but no longer entirely alone. The storm outside roared and raged, but inside, a fragile connection had formed. Survival demanded awareness, patience, and intelligence. And for the first time, she realized that humans, in their quiet, careful way, embodied all of these qualities in a way that could rival even the fiercest predators. The storm had faded by morning, leaving the landscape battered and raw, but the shelter remained intact. Zyra stretched her stiff limbs, muscles aching from long hours of crouching and tension. She had survived countless storms, yet the events of the last night weighed heavily on her mind. She glanced at the human, who was already moving with careful purpose, examining the shelter and adjusting its makeshift reinforcements. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, and efficient. Zyra watched, fascinated, as the human seemed to anticipate problems before they arose, fixing weak points and preparing for dangers that had not yet appeared. Curiosity mixed with lingering caution. Zyra had survived by trusting her instincts, by reading danger and reacting quickly. This human was different. It relied not on speed or aggression, but on observation and careful planning. There was intelligence in every motion, a patience that she had rarely encountered among other species. Zyra wanted to understand it, to learn how it thought, but fear still lingered. Could she trust this being, or was it only waiting for an opportunity to strike? She decided to test it in a small way. From her pack, she pulled a scrap of cloth and laid it in front of herself. Then she gestured toward it, hoping to see how the human would respond. The human paused, studying the object carefully, then picked it up gently and examined it. Zyra felt a small thrill of satisfaction. The human was not aggressive. It was curious, and it considered the situation before acting. She realized that patience and understanding were as valuable as speed or strength. "Water," the human said suddenly, pointing to the small puddle in the corner and then to its mouth. Zyra's eyes widened slightly. It spoke words she could not understand, yet she recognized the intent. It needed sustenance, as she did. Carefully, she handed over a small container of water. The human accepted it politely, nodding slightly, its eyes bright and alert. Zyra felt a spark of connection. This was more than survival. It was cooperation, a tentative partnership forming under the storm's shadow. For the first time, Zyra considered the possibility that she might not have to face the storm alone. She could work with this human, combining her own instincts and knowledge with its intelligence and careful observation. The idea was unfamiliar, yet comforting. She had survived by herself for so long, relying on speed, strength, and instinct. Now she saw a new form of survival, one built on trust, awareness, and mutual benefit. The human moved toward a broken section of the shelter wall. Zyra followed cautiously, observing its method. It selected pieces of debris, arranging them to reinforce the weak points. Each action was deliberate, precise, and thoughtful. Zyra could see the logic in every decision, the careful planning that ensured no mistake would be made. She felt a strange mixture of admiration and apprehension. If humans were this clever in thought and action, no predator could underestimate them. Curiosity overcame caution. Zyra began to imitate the human's methods, moving debris with care, testing the stability of the shelter, and reinforcing weak areas. The human watched, occasionally offering small gestures of guidance, pointing to pieces of rock or metal, showing her how to use them more effectively. Zyra's heart raced with a strange exhilaration. Cooperation, learning, and adaptation were new tools in her survival arsenal, and they were proving as valuable as any weapon she had wielded. Hours passed. The storm outside had left the landscape scarred, jagged rocks scattered across the red soil, and twisted remnants of flora struggling against the wind. Zyra and the human ventured carefully outside the shelter, testing the terrain. Each step was cautious, each movement deliberate. Zyra was struck by how the human observed the world, noticing patterns and risks that she might have overlooked. It was alert, intelligent, and patient, qualities that she realized could rival even the most fearsome predators. They reached a narrow cliff path where debris from the storm had created dangerous gaps. Zyra would have crossed quickly, relying on speed and instinct, but the human stopped, studied the path, and gestured for her to wait. Then it selected a long, sturdy piece of metal and used it to test the ground ahead. Step by step, the human moved, ensuring safety. Zyra followed, learning from its patience and careful planning. For the first time, she appreciated that survival was not always about reacting fast, but about thinking ahead, anticipating danger, and using intelligence to guide action. As the day progressed, Zyra and the human began to share resources more openly. Food and water were divided, simple gestures of cooperation forming a fragile bond. Zyra realized that this partnership was not just about survival, it was about understanding. The human's careful observation, planning, and intelligence complemented her own instincts and agility. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. Late in the day, they returned to the shelter. Zyra was tired, her muscles sore from the long day of activity, but she felt the sense of accomplishment. The shelter was stronger, safer, and more secure than it had been before. She glanced at the human, who was arranging the remaining tools and devices with the same care and precision. There was a quiet respect growing between them, unspoken yet palpable. Zyra realized that trust, even tentative, was forming. Night fell again, and the storm clouds lingered on the horizon, remnants of the earlier tempest. Zyra and the human settled near the reinforced walls, sharing a small meal and taking turns keeping watch. Every sound outside made them tense, but together they felt safer. Zyra found herself watching the human, fascinated by its calmness and methodical nature. It did not panic, it did not rush. It observed, considered, and acted with purpose. She realized that these qualities, combined with courage, made humans formidable in ways predators could not anticipate. As they rested, Zyra allowed herself to reflect on her past experiences. She had faced countless dangers, relied on her instincts and agility, and survived where many others had not. But the presence of this human introduced a new dimension to survival: cooperation, intelligence, and careful observation. She saw now that strength was not only in the body or the instincts, but in the mind, and in the ability to trust, even cautiously, another being. Suddenly a sound echoed from outside the shelter. A low, guttural growl. Zyra froze, her instincts kicking in. The human rose slowly, scanning the environment. The predator was close, attracted by the smell of life, and the two of them had no choice but to act carefully. Zyra moved silently, ready to defend, but the human signaled her to wait. Then it produced a small device from its pack, one that emitted a low-frequency pulse. The sound caused the predator to hesitate, and its movement became cautious. Zyra watched in astonishment. The human had turned intelligence into a survival tool, using understanding of sound and behavior to manipulate a dangerous situation. The predator eventually retreated, unsure and unsettled by the unfamiliar signal. Zyra's heart raced, a mixture of fear and awe coursing through her. Humans had a way of surviving that was not brute strength, but cleverness, observation, and ingenuity. She began to see that the human could be trusted, at least enough to survive the immediate danger, the predator gone. Zyra returned to the shelter with the human, silently acknowledging the unspoken partnership that had formed. They shared a quiet moment of relief, understanding that their survival depended on cooperation as much as skill. Zyra realized that fear had not driven her away from the human. Curiosity and observation had replaced it. She felt a growing sense of respect and cautious trust. As night deepened, they worked together to fortify the shelter further, using debris and scavenged materials to create barriers and safe spaces. Zyra followed the human's lead, learning methods she had never used before. Every step, every action reinforced the fragile bond between them. Survival was no longer solitary. It was shared, combining instinct and intelligence, courage and patience. Hours turned into quiet moments of observation and learning. Zyra began to understand the human's thought process. Careful, deliberate, patient, yet adaptable. She mirrored some of its actions, combining her instincts with its methods, creating a synergy that strengthened both of them. For the first time, she felt that survival was not only about enduring threats, but about learning, adapting, and forming alliances, even with beings from a completely different world. The storm outside was mostly gone, leaving a calm that was almost eerie after the chaos of the previous day. Zyra looked at the human and realized something important. Intelligence, observation, and patience were as powerful as speed, agility, or instinct. The human had survived by thinking, planning, and observing, and in doing so, it had earned her cautious trust. They settled for the night, each taking turns keeping watch, their movements coordinated silently. Zyra reflected on the day's events, understanding that her survival instincts were no longer enough on their own. The human had introduced her to a new form of survival, one that combined courage, patience, intelligence, and trust. She had never imagined that survival could involve cooperation in this way. Yet here, it had proven effective and even inspiring. Before sleep claimed her, Zyra glanced at the human once more. It was a strange, foreign creature, yet it had taught her something valuable. Survival was not only about strength or cunning, but also about understanding, observation, and the ability to work together. She felt a small spark of hope, fragile but real, that they could face whatever dangers lay ahead. And so, in the dim light of the shelter, Zyra and the human rested, silent but alert. The storm had passed, but challenges remained. Predators, harsh terrain, and the unknown still threatened them. Yet together they had survived. Zyra understood now that survival was not just about her own instincts. It was about intelligence, patience, and the cautious trust of another being. For the first time, she felt that survival was not just possible, it could be stronger, wiser, and even inspiring when shared. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world outside battered and raw. The red soil was scattered with jagged rocks, and twisted fragments of metal and wood lay like broken memories of the chaos. Zyra stepped out of the shelter, her senses alert. The air smelled of wet earth, metal, and something faintly sweet, like the remnants of plants that had endured the storm. She glanced at the human beside her, who moved with careful purpose, scanning the terrain and noting weak points, safe paths, and potential dangers. Together they faced a landscape that was both familiar and alien. Zyra had survived storms before, predators before, and loneliness before, but the combination of this human and the challenges ahead was unlike anything she had faced. She observed its movements, noting how it carefully tested the ground before stepping, how it considered every action before acting. There was intelligence in every motion, and Zyra found herself both impressed and curious. Humans were physically weaker than her kind, but their intelligence, patience, and ingenuity made them capable of surviving even when strength failed. They began to navigate the rough terrain, moving cautiously over uneven rocks and broken debris. Zyra led at times, testing her agility and instincts, while the human took the lead in other moments, analyzing and selecting the safest path. The synergy was subtle at first, but it grew stronger with each step. Zyra realized that survival was no longer about individual skill alone. It was about combining strengths, observing patterns, and making careful decisions together. As they moved, Zyra noticed strange markings in the soil, tracks left by predators that had roamed the area during the storm. Her pulse quickened, and she instinctively crouched low. The human noticed immediately and paused, raising its hand to signal caution. They moved silently, stepping carefully around the tracks, observing every detail. Zyra marveled at how the human seemed to understand threats not through speed or power, but through careful observation and deduction. Each decision minimized risk, and she began to realize that intelligence could be as protective as any weapon. Hours passed as they navigated the broken landscape. Zyra's muscles ached, and her skin was scraped by jagged rocks, but she felt a sense of exhilaration. For the first time, she was not simply surviving. She was learning, adapting, and cooperating in a way that made survival almost enjoyable. The human moved beside her, silent but communicative, using gestures, expressions, and small sounds to convey warnings, instructions, and observations. Zyra began to mimic these gestures, creating a rudimentary system of communication. It was imperfect, but it worked. As they climbed a ridge, the wind picked up again. Not a storm this time, but enough to make movement difficult. Dust and sand whipped across the landscape, stinging Zyra's skin and making her blink repeatedly. The human paused, scanning the horizon. Then it crouched and selected a long, sturdy branch, using it to test the stability of the ground ahead. Zyra followed, testing each step before moving, learning the method. She felt a sense of awe at the human's patience, its careful balance between caution and progress. Humans had a way of surviving that did not rely on brute strength or speed, but on intelligence, foresight, and observation. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from below. Zyra froze, her instincts sharp. A predator, drawn by movement or scent, had approached. The human did not panic. Instead, it gestured for Zyra to stay low and carefully selected a small device from its pack. It pressed a button, emitting a high-pitched sound that echoed through the rocky valley. The predator hesitated, uncertain of the source. It sniffed the air, growled softly, and then retreated slowly, confused and unsettled. Zyra watched, astonished. Humans had a way of surviving that relied not on claws or speed, but on cleverness, observation, and ingenuity. They continued their journey, moving more cautiously now. Zyra noticed small changes in the environment. Cracks in rocks that could collapse, loose soil that might give way, hidden pools of water that could be dangerous. The human observed all of these, noting them silently, and gestured for Zyra to adjust her steps. Each time she realized that their combined awareness made them safer than either could be alone. Survival was no longer a solitary effort. It was a partnership of intelligence and instinct, courage and careful observation. As evening approached, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking. Scarlet cliffs, twisted metal ruins, and the last remnants of storm clouds glowing in the fading light. Zyra paused, taking a deep breath. For the first time since the storm began, she felt a sense of calm. She glanced at the human, who was already preparing a small space for rest. It used scraps of debris to create a secure area, checking for weak points and potential hazards. Zyra assisted, learning new techniques, observing how intelligence and patience could reinforce safety. Night fell, and the valley below was quiet except for distant sounds. Rocks shifting, small creatures moving, and the faint hum of the wind. Zyra and the human settled into their makeshift camp, sharing food and water. Zyra realized that survival was no longer just about instincts and agility. It was about cooperation, understanding, and mutual support. The human had taught her something important. Intelligence and observation could be as powerful as strength, and trust, even cautious, could enhance survival. During the night, Zyra watched the human carefully. It moved silently, checking the surroundings, ensuring safety. She realized that humans survived not by being the strongest, but by being the smartest, the most patient, and the most observant. They thought ahead, planned for dangers, and adapted quickly to new situations. Zyra's admiration grew, and she found herself trusting it more, not blindly, but because she had seen its abilities in action. The next morning, they continued down into the valley. The landscape was treacherous, with broken paths, unstable rocks, and remnants of the storm's destruction. Zyra led at times, using her agility to test paths, while the human analyzed potential hazards and guided her. Together they moved cautiously, each learning from the other. Zyra began to see patterns in the human's thinking, anticipation of risk, careful planning, and clever use of tools. These were qualities she had rarely encountered in any species, and she realized that humans could survive in ways that few predators could. They encountered a shallow river, swollen by the storm. The current was strong, and Zyra hesitated. The human examined the river carefully, selecting a series of stones and a fallen tree to create a safe crossing. Zyra followed, learning to rely on intelligence and careful observation rather than instinct alone. Step by step, they crossed, each movement precise, each decision calculated. The river was a challenge, but together they overcame it without incident. On the other side, Zyra paused to catch her breath. She looked at the human and realized something important. Survival was no longer just about enduring challenges alone. It was about combining strengths, learning from each other, and trusting intelligence, patience, and observation. Humans were physically weaker than her species, but their cleverness, careful thinking, and adaptability made them formidable in a way that she had never fully appreciated. They continued through the valley, encountering occasional predators. Each time, the human found non-violent ways to avoid confrontation, detours, distractions, and clever use of tools. Zyra began to understand that survival was not always about fighting. It was about thinking, observing, and acting with foresight. Humans had mastered this art, and she was learning from it. As the day ended, they found a small cave to rest in. Zyra helped reinforce it with rocks and debris, following the human's guidance. They shared a simple meal, exchanging what little they had. Zyra realized that this partnership, fragile and cautious as it was, had become essential. Together they were stronger, safer, and more capable of facing the dangers ahead. During the night, Zyra lay awake, reflecting on the journey. She had survived countless storms, predators, and challenges, but this experience was different. The human had taught her a new form of survival, one that relied on intelligence, observation, and cooperation. She felt a sense of respect and cautious trust, realizing that together they could overcome dangers that neither could face alone. As dawn approached, the valley below was bathed in soft light. Zyra and the human prepared to continue their journey, moving with careful purpose. Each step was deliberate, each decision thoughtful. The world was still dangerous, but together they had become more than the sum of their parts. Zyra understood now that survival was not only about strength, speed, or instinct. It was about intelligence, observation, patience, and cautious trust. With the valley stretching ahead of them, Zyra felt a sense of hope she had not known in years. The storm had tested her, forced her to rely on instinct and courage, and now it had introduced her to a new kind of survival, a partnership built on understanding, observation, and mutual support. Humans were remarkable, she realized, not because of their strength, but because of their intelligence, patience, and ability to adapt. And so, Zyra and the human continued, moving cautiously but confidently through the valley. Each step was a lesson, each obstacle a challenge to overcome together. The storm had passed, but the dangers of the world remained. Yet for the first time, Zyra felt that they could face them not alone, but together, combining instinct, intelligence, patience, and cooperation. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she knew that together they could survive, and perhaps even thrive, in ways that neither could have imagined alone. The sun rose over the valley, painting the jagged cliffs with gold and crimson. Zyra stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles from the long journey, but also a strange sense of strength. The storm had passed, yet the world remained dangerous. Debris littered the terrain, predators roamed unseen in the distance, and the wind still carried a bite of chill. Despite this, she felt a flicker of hope. She glanced at the human beside her. It moved with quiet confidence, scanning the surroundings, alert but calm. Together, they had survived what neither could face alone, and now they would face the challenges ahead. The path before them was treacherous. The storm had turned once solid ground into loose rocks and unstable soil. Small crevices had opened, and water from melted snow and rain ran in unpredictable streams. Zyra stepped carefully, testing each surface with her foot before placing her weight. The human moved beside her, observing closely, pointing with gestures to warn of weak spots. She realized that her own instincts were now enhanced by the human's intelligence and foresight. They were stronger together, each complementing the other. As they descended into a narrow canyon, a low growl echoed through the rocks. Zyra froze. She recognized the sound immediately. Predators, hungry, agile, and relentless. She tensed, ready to leap or fight if necessary. The human crouched beside her, pulling a small device from its pack. It activated a sound pulse that echoed across the canyon, confusing and slowing the predators. Zyra's heart pounded as she watched the creatures hesitate, unsure of the strange signal. Intelligence, observation, and ingenuity once again proved more powerful than strength alone. The predators eventually backed away, frustrated by the strange signals and uncertain terrain. Zyra exhaled slowly, realizing that their combined skills had averted a direct confrontation. She looked at the human, understanding that survival was no longer just about instinct or agility. It was about thinking, planning, and using every tool at their disposal. The human had shown her a new kind of power, one that relied on cleverness, observation, and patience rather than brute force. They continued through the canyon, moving cautiously. Zyra noticed subtle changes in the environment. A loose boulder here, a slippery patch there, small creatures darting across their path. The human observed everything, using gestures and small sounds to communicate warnings. Zyra mirrored these movements, learning to anticipate dangers before they became threats. Step by step they moved, each decision deliberate, each action informed by awareness and intelligence. The canyon widened into a plateau, and Zyra could see the remnants of structures half buried in rock and soil, evidence of earlier settlers, perhaps long gone, or abandoned by humans who had come before. She stepped lightly over the debris, her eyes scanning for movement. The human moved beside her, careful and steady, occasionally pointing to hazards or adjusting the path. She realized that intelligence and observation were not just useful, they could save life itself. A sudden sound drew their attention. A predator, larger than any they had encountered before, emerged from behind a broken wall of rock. Its eyes glinted with hunger, and its claws scraped the ground. Zyra tensed, instinct screaming at her to run. The human did not panic. It gestured to Zyra to stay low and slowly produced a small device. Pressing a button, a low-frequency pulse echoed through the plateau, creating vibrations that unsettled the predator. It snarled, confused, but did not advance. Zyra watched in awe as the human used its intelligence and tools to manage the threat without direct confrontation. The predator eventually retreated, uncertain and cautious. Zyra exhaled, her pulse still racing. She realized that humans survived not through physical strength or aggression, but through cleverness, observation, and careful use of resources. She had always relied on speed, reflexes, and instinct, but now she understood the power of thought, patience, and ingenuity. Together they had turned a dangerous situation into safety. They continued their journey, moving toward a distant ridge that Zyra had identified as a possible safe zone. The terrain was challenging: steep cliffs, loose rocks, and shallow streams that cut across the path. Zyra led at times, her agility and instincts allowing her to navigate quickly. The human led at other times, carefully planning each step, using simple tools and observations to ensure safety. Step by step they moved, each action deliberate, each choice informed by experience and awareness. As they approached the ridge, Zyra noticed the terrain shifting beneath her feet. A small rock slide threatened to block their path. She froze, recognizing the danger immediately. The human did not panic. Instead, it moved with precision, placing stones strategically to stabilize the path and testing each section before moving forward. Zyra followed its lead, combining her instincts with its careful planning. Together, they navigated the unstable slope safely, learning from each other's strengths. By mid-afternoon, they reached the top of the ridge. From this vantage point, Zyra could see the world stretching out before them. Twisting valleys, jagged cliffs, and distant forests of alien flora. The storm had scarred the landscape, but life persisted. She felt a sense of awe at the resilience of the world, and a deeper understanding of resilience in herself and the human. Together they had survived storms, predators, and treacherous terrain. Together they had learned from each other, growing stronger and more capable. Zyra felt a growing respect for the human. It had survived challenges that would have killed many, relying on intelligence, observation, and patience. It had guided her, taught her, and saved her life through cleverness rather than violence. She realized that humans possessed a unique combination of qualities: curiosity, courage, ingenuity, and empathy that made them formidable in ways that brute strength could not match. As the sun began to set, they prepared a temporary camp near the ridge's edge. Zyra collected small branches and debris, reinforcing a sheltered spot. The human assisted, using simple tools and careful observation to enhance the structure. Together, they created a small safe zone, combining instinct and intelligence, strength and planning. Zyra realized that survival was no longer solitary. It was about learning, adapting, and cooperating with others. Night fell, and the stars emerged over the crimson cliffs. Zyra watched the sky, her mind reflecting on the journey. She had survived storms, predators, and isolation, but the human had shown her a new dimension of survival, one built on intelligence, observation, and cooperation. She felt a quiet admiration, realizing that humans could thrive not because they were the strongest, but because they were clever, patient, and adaptable. During the night, a distant howl echoed through the valley. Zyra tensed, instinctively ready to leap or fight. The human, however, moved with calm efficiency, using a small device to emit vibrations that confused the predators and kept them at bay. Zyra watched, astonished. Humans had learned to turn intelligence into survival itself, using observation, planning, and tools to manage danger without confrontation. She realized that she could trust this being, not blindly, but because it had proven its skill and awareness repeatedly. By morning, the valley was calm. Zyra and the human resumed their journey, moving carefully down the slope toward a distant plateau that promised safety. Each step was deliberate, each decision calculated. Zyra's instincts were sharper, enhanced by the human's intelligence and foresight. Together, they navigated the terrain with greater efficiency, avoiding hazards, predicting predator behavior, and conserving energy. She felt a sense of accomplishment and growing trust in their partnership. They encountered a narrow stream, swollen from the storm. Zyra tested the rocks, but the current was fast and treacherous. The human analyzed the situation carefully, selecting a series of stones and a fallen tree to create a stable path. Zyra followed, learning to combine her agility with the human's planning. Step by step, they crossed safely, each movement a lesson in observation, patience, and cooperation. She marveled at how the human could survive in ways that required neither speed nor strength, yet were as effective as any predator's instinct. As they reached the edge of the plateau, Zyra paused to catch her breath. The landscape below stretched endlessly, twisting valleys, rocky cliffs, and remnants of storms. She realized that survival was no longer about instincts alone, but about intelligence, observation, and careful cooperation. The human had taught her a new form of strength, one that relied on thought, patience, and the ability to adapt. Suddenly, movement caught her eye. A predator, large and powerful, emerged from the shadows, its eyes glinting with hunger. Zyra tensed, ready to fight or flee. The human, calm and deliberate, gestured for her to stay low and produced a small device. It emitted a low-frequency pulse, confusing the predator and causing it to hesitate. Zyra watched, heart racing, as the human combined observation, intelligence, and tools to neutralize the threat without direct conflict. The predator retreated, unsure and cautious. Zyra exhaled slowly, relief flooding through her. She realized that humans survived not through aggression or brute force, but through cleverness, observation, and foresight. Together they had faced predators, storms, and treacherous terrain, learning from each other and growing stronger. She felt admiration, respect, and cautious trust, understanding that intelligence and cooperation could overcome even the most dangerous challenges. By evening, they reached a safe zone, an area sheltered from predators, with stable ground and water. Zyra and the human worked together to reinforce the site, preparing for rest and recovery. They shared food and water, each appreciating the other's contributions. Zyra realized that survival was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a partnership of intelligence, observation, and cautious trust. As the stars emerged overhead, Zyra reflected on the journey. She had survived storms, predators, and isolation. But the human had shown her a new path, one built on cooperation, intelligence, and observation. She understood now that humans were formidable not because of strength, but because of cleverness, patience, and the ability to adapt. She felt a sense of hope, fragile but real, that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quiet of the night, Zyra lay beside the human, alert but at peace. She thought about the storms they had survived, the predators they had avoided, and the lessons they had learned together. She understood that survival was not just about instinct or strength, but about intelligence, observation, patience, and trust. Humans had taught her that survival could be smarter, safer, and even inspiring when shared. The sun rose again, painting the valley with light and promise. Zyra and the human prepared to continue their journey, moving with careful purpose and growing confidence. The world remained dangerous, but together they had survived storms, predators, and treacherous terrain. They had learned from each other, adapted, and grown stronger. Survival was no longer a solitary struggle. It was a shared effort, built on intelligence, observation, and cooperation. Zyra glanced at the human, her heart swelling with cautious respect. Together they had faced impossible challenges and emerged stronger. She realized that humans were remarkable not for their physical strength, but for their intelligence, patience, and adaptability. With these qualities, they could survive, thrive, and inspire. And so, Zyra and the human continued into the horizon, facing the unknown with courage, intelligence, and trust. The storm had tested them, predators had challenged them, and the terrain had threatened them, but together they had endured. Zyra understood now that survival was not only about instincts or strength. It was about learning, adapting, and cooperating. She felt a sense of triumph, fragile yet real, that together they could navigate any challenge and embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. The journey continued, but for the first time, Zyra did not feel alone. She had discovered a new form of survival, one built on intelligence, patience, and cautious trust. The human had shown her that strength was not only in the body or instincts, but in thought, observation, and cooperation. Together they had survived the storm, the predators, and the unknown. And together they would continue, facing the future not with fear, but with hope, courage, and the power of shared understanding.